Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a senior and respected professional and a coach from Maryland, USA, Ron Souers II. Ron, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be sharing the space with you.
Thank you. Ron is a strengths coach. He's also the host of the podcast, Don't Mind Me, I Just Have ADHD. So, Ron,
Yeah.
before we come to coaching, a few questions for you. You've spoken about decades of masking and burnout. What was the turnout that made you step into advocacy and coaching?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely, you know, I, I've been dealing with ADHD my whole life. Most of
Hmm.
it, I didn't even know I had it. So once I kind of found out that I had it, that started another journey of, acceptance and, through failure and I ended up almost losing my job again, even after I had discovered that I had ADHD because I took on a position that was
Hmm.
required me to, um, operate heavy machinery such as like forklifts. And, I was running into reinforcement poles and taking them out and, puncturing like drums with chemical in it. And, it was a disaster. So I thought I'd gotten better with it because I actually went back to see my therapist, and it just wasn't enough. Fortunately, because like there was so much stress going on with like me about to lose my job, like the way the role was set up, and
Hmm.
the way that I couldn't really manage my ADHD at the time.
Hmm.
So I decided to step down from that role. And in that process, like I really was starting to look at other options. And one of those options was my podcast,
Hmm.
so because I wanted to talk about mental health, but specifically ADHD
Hmm.
in the workplace, because there wasn't a lot out there about tools and techniques and stories about it. And it was very hard to find. So I wanted to
Yeah.
have it in like one solid, tight resource for guys that are just like me.
Hmm.
And I thought that would be the end all be all. But if you run a podcast, like
Absolutely.
that it's not just, you know, like very few people actually make a living off of the
Oh,
podcast. And
absolutely. Yes.
yeah. And so that's when I started looking into coaching because I started to develop this thing called pro-social um, interactions, and which basically means like I'm gonna meet whoever I meet, not everybody, but a lot of people that I talk to, I go deep quickly,
Hmm.
about passions or struggles. Normally I talk about ADHD and what's going on, or
Hmm.
depression, whatever's going on in my life. I talk to a complete stranger about it and find this amazing connection that a lot of us are missing in our lives, and are afraid to do so because
Hmm.
um, we can't trust somebody we just met,
Correct.
right? With this
Correct.
information.
That is true.
Uh,
Well said. So let's now talk
Yeah.
about strengths coaching, mental health advocacy, and ADHD. How does mindfulness based strengths practice, which you call MBSP, differ from traditional coaching approaches?
Yeah, MBSP is the practice of mindfulness based character strength. So
Mm.
what that basically means is like it takes mindfulness, the attributes of mindfulness and character strengths, and combines them into one practice.
Mm.
So like through that practice, we have 24 character strengths, like such as forgiveness, love of learning, creativity, critical thinking. Those are strengths that we often don't see as strengths. So it starts to uncover those strengths and you can see what those strengths are and spot them in other people, start to see them in yourself.
Mm.
And when you can do that, you start to mindfully look at those strengths and say, oh, like say leadership. If I'm, how am I leading? Or how is that person leading? Like, they have that strength, but are they being, overbearing or micromanaging? Or are they leading with empathy, which is a better way of leading, with teamwork involved? So, and then it's taking the character strengths and applying that to mindfulness, such as like curiosity or exploring love with mindfulness, like when you observe your thoughts that are going through your mind and just lovingly understanding them and accepting them, but also coming in there with that curiosity is like, well, why am I thinking this? Why do I think that I'm worthless? Or why is this that this person's saying to me bothering me? So it's allowing you to explore those with the character strengths instead of just just one without the other isn't as strong as when they are together.
Mm. Well said. And how do you balance encouraging people to lean into their strengths while still addressing blind spots?
It's just it's a process.
Hmm.
It's it's more looking at what you're doing than what you're not doing.
Mm.
And one of the tenets of MBSP is to look at things as problems, as opportunities to grow.
Mm.
So it's like if I'm sitting in traffic, like there's really nothing I can do.
Yeah.
I can practice patience, or it's an opportunity to look at other people and
Mm.
see this whole process in a different manner
Yeah.
because like there's nothing I can do. I'm in traffic. The best thing I can do is make the best of it. And seeing other people in their car, or it's an opportunity to practice forgiveness
Mm.
because somebody cut me off. People will make mistakes. Maybe they're in a rush, but
Yeah.
they didn't mean to do that. So why should I like, hold that in for them when it's not going to do anything but hurt me?
Mm. Great response. Ron, do you find men over 40 face unique challenges in embracing their strengths compared to other groups?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, we all have our own unique challenges, but like I would say especially 40 because like, you're right at the edge of like, if your life's not together at that point, you kind of feel like everything's given up,
Mm.
and you're too old to start a new path, or you're set in your ways and nothing can change. But like I'm here to tell you, like I've changed tremendously in just a few short years. And the more that I focus on my change, like, especially with ADHD, because, a lot of adults are under the impression
Mm.
that ADHD was like a childhood disease.
Mm.
That's not true. You don't
Mm.
grow out of ADHD. You don't fix it. It's just the way your brain's set up.
Correct. Correct.
So it's about figuring out how to operate with your brain. And like I often use that example of Benjamin Franklin didn't even start inventing like his life until after he was 44.
Right.
So if you think that life is over, just look at Benjamin and what he was able to accomplish through the latter part of his life,
Correct.
where most people would have said, well, it's time to give up, look at retirement, or, life's done. I'm on the downhill. He was actually on his uphill
Absolutely
rise.
right. Absolutely right. I started my business after 25 years in the corporate sector
Yeah.
at 46, and I built India's second largest chain of pharmacies
Wow.
after 46. So you're absolutely
That's
right. There is no
that's
right
amazing.
age, especially because we are all going to live till we are 95 or more. But Ron,
Yeah.
moving on, what role does self-compassion play in strengths-based coaching?
Self-compassion is key. I would say it's probably up there with acceptance. Self-acceptance really has to come first, and it's not going to come right away.
Mm.
Especially since we've been pretty much programmed our whole
Yeah.
life by our parents, the system, to kind of think of ourselves as what we need to fix, what we're not doing that other people are, and how do we live up to that? Instead of looking inside of ourselves and seeing the strengths that are there and seeing what we need to work on and having compassion. Compassion is like one of those things that I call it fierce kindness, because it takes it to the next level. And it's not something that I invented. It's just something that I personally cultivate, in my life, because it's about standing up for, your boundaries. It's about, being nice and respectful and treating people as fellow human beings within reason, and seeing the trauma in other people
Mm.
and allowing people their space to be who they are,
Mm.
and not necessarily retaliating.
Mm.
Sometimes you got to stand up and say what you feel is right,
Mm.
whether that's accepted or not. It's about making those choices because you know that
Mm.
it's right.
Mm.
And you know that if you don't do those things, that it's going to continue to eat at you. And you've got to look out for
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
first and foremost.
Mm. Well said. Moving on, Ron, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you encounter about ADHD, depression, or addiction in adults?
Yeah, it's more about the misunderstanding, the stigma of, that people are lazy or, addicts are just doing this because they want to, or depression is something that you can just get over.
Mm.
It doesn't work that way, and it's like depression for me can happen at any time.
Right.
Like it literally, like things could be feeling so well, and then suddenly something shifts or somebody says, and I'm depressed.
Mm.
Like, and there's no reason why I'm there, and there's absolutely no reason when I do explore it. So it's like if you can imagine just being like the most depressing day that you've had, just imagine having that for, just most of your life. Like,
Mm.
and for some people, it's an everyday thing. So if you can just imagine that and have some empathy there, then I think that's a really good starting point to be able to, say, look,
Mm.
it's not easy to just like it. We wish we could do that.
Correct.
We wish we could stop. Like addicts wish they could stop. It's just you've got to get to the point, especially with addiction,
Mm.
that um you you need help. Like you know that this is a problem
Mm.
and you're trying to get better. And even then, like that's still a process in
Mm.
itself. So
Mm.
giving them that understanding and that space and just letting them do what they need to do
Mm.
to get back and just holding out that hope. Because
Amazing.
I was, if nobody held out that hope for me, like I wouldn't be here today.
Absolutely. Great response. And why do you think so many men in midlife struggle with silence, isolation, or feeling disconnected?
I feel like mainly because we can't talk about what's really going on.
Mm.
Especially the other emotions, like the deeper emotions like sadness, depression. A lot of times we can't talk about like anger, and it's like you can only be angry in a certain way, and we don't experience real joy because of that, and also the shame. Um, when we make mistakes, it's like, or the fear that we have too.
Mm.
Like a lot of men, even the ones that are open, don't talk about that fear, especially around their kids or in a position of leadership because like they don't want to appear weak. They go by this ideal that they've been taught and programmed to have, like that I need to be look like everything rolls off my shoulder because if
Mm.
I look weak, then everybody's gonna like, it just doesn't even make any
Yeah.
sense. Like
Yeah.
why they need to hold on to that.
Very interesting. And what are some overlooked signs that someone may be silently struggling with mental health challenges?
Yeah, it's really the subtle things like, somebody being more quiet,
Mm.
um, not themselves, it's asking those questions like, and getting to know them really.
Mm.
So when you know them, you're like, hey, or just asking, like, how's your day going? Or how you been?
Mm.
And if they say, oh, it's been better, or it's been one of those days, dig
Mm.
deeper. That's like a sign
Mm.
for like, people don't just say that. Some people do just to be
Mm.
funny, but like a lot of the time it's an opportunity to walk through a door that helps both of you to understand each other.
Yeah.
It gives them the opportunity to release some stress that they're not able to talk about with other
Mm.
people,
Mm.
in a constructive way, and it gives you the opportunity to get to know them better
Mm.
and just be there. And a lot of times it's just listening. You don't have
Very
to come up
interesting.
with a solution. We
Very
often have our own solution
correct.
already.
Correct.
We just need to talk it through.
Correct. Well said. Through your podcast, Don't Mind Me, I Just Have ADHD, what have you learned about building connection with other neurodivergent adults?
I've learned a lot. Especially with other neurodivergencies and even how ADHD shows up in other people, like different cultures, in women as well, that it's different, it shows up, and um, how that's and the similarities, especially when I did my podcast on ADHD and being queer. So like the LGBTQ community is so like accepting and it's like they're different just like me.
Mm.
Like I felt like I was part of a community that I just totally overlooked.
Mm.
It opened my eyes to understand that we have so many things in common
Mm.
if we can just look past certain things that culture kind of tells us, oh, you shouldn't hang out with those people or you shouldn't
Mm.
associate with those people
Mm.
because you're going to be branded as part of that. And it's like, okay, well, who cares? Like
Correct.
I know who I am,
Yeah.
and the more connections that I have with other people, of different diverse walks, like
Mm.
the more robust and better person that I become.
Mm. Absolutely. Ron, many adults discover their ADHD later in life. What
Yeah.
advice do you give to those just beginning this journey?
Yeah, I would say, just it's okay.
Mm.
Like it's not a weakness. I'll tell like this is actually the strongest, most important part of you because the more that I learn about myself, the more that I'm happy that
Mm.
God made me this way, and it's like one thing that I've found is that people that are sensitive, and I just feel like that's what neurodivergents are, is just highly sensitive beings. And when you're highly sensitive, you're more empathetic. You're able to feel emotions on a deeper level, and
Mm.
you also have a stronger justice like um system. So it's like you are more strong with when things are wrong in the world, you're more able to speak up and understand and empathize with that. So you are more equipped to fight the injustices that are going on because
Mm.
the biggest obstacle to justice is apathy.
Mm. Mm. I've got time for two more questions for you. Can you explain how screen-free time helps regulate attention and emotional balance for those with ADHD?
Yeah, and that's definitely become more and more of a thing for me.
Hmm.
When I was in the beginning, it was more about sleep, getting the right sleep, um, and it's that blue light that kind of tricks your brain,
Hmm.
especially before you go to bed.
Yeah.
Like I've noticed when I made that switch, I became more of a morning person.
Mm-hmm.
And I understood that my productivity window is like between 8 and 11, where I'm the most productive throughout the day. So like I want to be able to be up for that time and watching screen.
Mm-hmm.
The evolution of that has been like, I think that if you're trying to do something incredible and you're trying to build your own business, especially and focus, like you need to not watch TV. And the only time that I try to I allow myself to listen to music is if I'm doing something to work.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, like that's all that opportunity that you have to learn, to grow, to get better is wasted because TV kind of programs you into these they have all these commercials that are just designed to steal your time and to steal your thoughts and to steal your creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And when you just sit there and watch it for, the average is like 4 to 6 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like I can't imagine doing that. Like even when I did watch TV, like it was only, on the weekends when I had time for maybe 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I've gotten rid of that, like the productivity just shoots through the roof because like I don't
Yes.
have any distractions.
Yeah. Well said. My last question for you, Ron. If workplaces truly embraced neurodiversity, what would the day-to-day experience look like for people who have ADHD?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question
I
again?
said, if workplaces truly embraced neurodiversity, what, in your view, would a day look like for an ADHD employee?
Yeah, I think that they would be able to show up to work, they would be valued. They'd feel like, coming into work, they'd
Mm,
have a lot better overall well-being. They'd feel more comfortable in advocating for themselves and talking about, and the business on the other side would benefit because
mm,
you have these different ways of looking at the same process.
mm,
And when you do that, you can find a better way to do things and incorporate that and maybe a better style of managing because of that, because you're open to like giving people the autonomy within their set responsibility or where they're at in their workplace
mhm,
to do what they need to do because you trust them. You need to
mm.
trust your employees
Yeah.
that you hire to do the job that they're doing to the best of their ability without having
Mm,
to look over their shoulder. The
mm,
only thing you really should do is just ask them, hey, like, what can I do to help you get your
mm,
job done better? Because that's just it's so it's so productive
mm,
and it gives you an edge in the industry. So like, yeah, I totally support and that's one of the things I advocate for is
fascinating.
more open mindedness in the industry about neurodivergencies.
Wonderful. And on that note, Ron, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been. Thank you for speaking to me about your journey. I thought we covered some amazing ground on ADHD, on mental health advocacy. Thank you again for talking to me and good luck to you.
Yeah, thank you for your curiosity and your prudence.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.